A column of pickup trucks and light utility vehicles is rolling toward a marshalling point near Malynivka in Donetsk region, 20 kilometers behind what either side would call the front line moving up, by the Ukrainian unit's own description, for an assault still to come. Overhead, an operator from the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov Unmanned Systems Battalion is already watching through a first-person view feed. The brigade released the footage on August 11, 2026, under a caption that spelled out the unit's own intention: the kill zone will extend even deeper. For most of this war, 12 miles behind the line has meant safety. On this stretch of road it has not, and it has not for weeks. One convoy is the smallest part of what is happening here. The larger question is why Russia keeps sending convoys into ground it already knows is watched, and what that says about how deep behind the line safety still exists at all. A column like this is built out of pickups and light trucks for a reason, and the reason explains more than the strike does. Russia's armored losses over the course of this war, documented by open-source loss trackers cross-referencing photo and video evidence, have run into the many thousands of tanks and fighting vehicles. Those losses have pushed Russian formations toward a tactic Western defense analysts and Ukrainian officers have both described repeatedly: smaller assault groups moving in soft-skinned civilian vehicles, motorcycles, and light trucks rather than armor, trading protection for speed and for a lower cost if the vehicle is lost. A pickup truck is cheap to replace, a tank is not, and there are steadily fewer of them to spare. The vehicles in this convoy were not an improvisation. They were the doctrine Russian commanders have been leaning on for the better part of a year in exactly this part of Donetsk. This stretch of the line has stayed active for months, and not only since one event. On July 22, 2026, Russian forces launched a large mechanized assault in the same general area, an offensive push big enough to draw named formations. Elements described in reporting from Ukraine's National Guard 1st Corps Azov as the 8th and 41st Combined Arms Armies together with the 90th Tank Division. That is one side's account, and this episode treats it as a reported claim, not an independently confirmed order of battle. Ukrainian forces say they repelled the assault. The assault sits inside a longer stretch of contested movement through this corridor, rather than at the start of it. The road had already drawn enough Ukrainian drone activity to be geolocated by outside observers 12 days earlier. Convoys kept moving up through the weeks before and after the assault, because whichever push is underway, this road is still how a unit reaches the sector. The logistics tail trying to feed a front that armor alone could not carry. If a sourced explainer like this one is useful to you, following the channel costs nothing and keeps videos like it coming. A single first-person view drone, the kind striking this convoy, costs Ukraine on the order of hundreds of dollars to build, sometimes assembled from commercial components in a garage workshop closer to Kyiv than to the front. A single pickup truck loaded with the fuel, ammunition, and personnel needed to sustain an assault group costs vastly more than that to field and replace, before counting what it carries. That gap in cost is not new to this war, and it has been visible in the fighting since the first winter of it. What is newer, and what this episode is actually about, is a Ukrainian unit that has stopped treating the gap as a one-time ambush opportunity and started treating a stretch of road as terrain to be held with drones, the way an infantry unit holds a tree line. An ambush that fires once depends on surprise, and surprise expires the moment the target learns where it happened. What has kept working near Malynivka for weeks is sturdier than that, a held stretch of road, watched and struck again and again regardless of whether the crew driving through that week already knows the risk. The coordinates were circulating in open-source geolocation circles before the clip that opens this episode existed, posted publicly by the account known as Moklasen on July 10, 2026. Anyone on either side of the line could pull them up. Russian columns kept driving through anyway, because the road feeds a sector that has to be resupplied, and the alternatives are longer, slower, or watched just as closely. The difference from a single lucky strike has nothing to do with the enemy failing to see it coming. The enemy does see it coming, and that has not been enough to make the road stop being used. The Malynivka convoy is one case among many of Russia leaning on soft-skin transport. War monitoring groups tracking the front through 2025 and into 2026 have documented the same pattern recurring across multiple sectors of the line, from Kharkiv region in the north down through Donetsk. Assault groups of a handful of men riding motorcycles, quad bikes, or civilian pickup trucks, moving in short, staggered bursts rather than as a single visible column, specifically to reduce what any one drone strike can take out at once. The staggering is a countermeasure in its own right, a response to exactly the kind of kill zone this episode is about. It does not fully work here, because a buffer zone built on persistent coverage rather than a single lucky spot does not need the whole convoy visible at once to keep striking it. The hardware explains part of why this road became a kill zone rather than a lucky ambush site. A first-person view drone, an FPV in the shorthand both sides use, is built around a small multi-rotor airframe, a forward-facing camera transmitting a live video feed to the operator's goggles, and a warhead mounted on the nose or slung beneath the frame, most often a shaped charge munition. That shaped charge works on the same physics as a modern anti-tank round. A metal liner collapses under the explosive's detonation and focuses into a narrow, high-velocity jet, the Monroe effect, capable of punching through armor plate far thicker than the charge itself. Against a soft-skin pickup truck, the same warhead does not need to punch through anything at all. The truck's own fuel and cargo do the rest of the damage the moment the jet finds the cabin or the bed. The signal link is what decides the tactics. A standard FPV drone flies on a radio frequency video link, cheap and simple, but vulnerable to electronic warfare. A jammer broadcasting noise on the same frequency can blind the operator's feed or sever control entirely, and both sides have spent 2 years building jammers for exactly that purpose. Fiber-optic FPV drones solve the jamming problem by removing the radio link altogether. A spool of hair-thin fiber-optic cable, sometimes several kilometers of it, unspools behind the drone in flight, carrying video and control signals down a physical wire immune to any jammer built to interfere with radio spectrum. The trade-off is weight and range. The spool adds mass the airframe has to carry, and the drone can fly only as far as the cable allows before it runs out of line. Reporting from operators at multiple Ukrainian units, corroborated by Western defense coverage of the technology's spread through 2025 and 2026, has described fiber-optic ranges extending further behind the front with each generation of spool, though exact figures vary by manufacturer and are not treated here as a fixed number. Range is the mechanism behind a strike landing 20 kilometers back. A jamming-proof drone that can physically reach that far turns a road segment that used to be logistics country safely behind any frontline engagement range into ground. A drone crew can now watch and strike without ever crossing the front line itself. Russia has not been passive against this. Electronic warfare units have spent 2 years building denser and more powerful jamming coverage along contested sectors, and Russian sources reported fielding the Arena M during 2026, a vehicle-mounted active protection system originally designed to intercept anti-tank rockets and missiles, describing it, by their own account, as adapted to engage first-person view drones directly for the first time, detecting an incoming drone and firing a counter-munition before impact. That priority claim comes from the fielding side and has not turned up independent confirmation. Both measures share the same blind spot. A jammer broadcasting radio noise does nothing to a drone flying on a physical fiber-optic cable, because there is no radio signal to jam in the first place. And an active protection system mounted on an armored vehicle is not something a Ministry of Defense fits to a civilian pickup truck bought or requisitioned for a light vehicle assault group. The countermeasure is real. It is bolted to the wrong kind of vehicle for a war that is pushed towards soft skin transport out of necessity. A homeowner can fit a reinforced steel door and still leave 3 ground floor windows unlatched, and the expensive fix will sit there protecting the wrong opening. Cope cages, the improvised metal mesh frames Russian crews began welding onto armored vehicles from around 2022 onward specifically to detonate an FPV drone's warhead before it reaches the hull, run into the same mismatch. A cage bolted to a tank's turret has somewhere to attach. A pickup truck's cab and open bed offer no comparable structure to shield, and a mesh frame heavy enough to matter would add weight the vehicle cannot spare without losing the speed that is the whole point of using it in the first place. Every hardware answer built for this war so far assumes the target is armored. The convoy at Malynivka was a bet that speed and dispersal could substitute for armor, and against a standing, persistently watched kill zone, that bet did not pay off. The doctrine built on top of that hardware is where the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov's Unmanned Systems Battalion has been explicit in its own public statements. Describing the unit's general approach to unmanned operations along the Oryx sector of Donetsk, the battalion's commander, using the call sign Yas, has spoken about maintaining what he calls a buffer zone, roughly 1 to 2 kilometers deep, between the enemy's forward positions and Ukraine's own infantry, a strip of ground the unit tries to make lethal to cross before it ever reaches a trench line. The same commander has described a preference for coordinated small strikes over single drone attacks. 2 or 3 drones converging on one target beat a single drone doing the same job alone, because a lone drone that misses or is shot down ends the engagement, while a small coordinated group leaves the target no clean escape window between hits. By the battalion's own account, unmanned systems now account for roughly 80% of the targets the wider brigade engages, a figure that says a great deal about where a modern Ukrainian infantry brigade's killing power actually comes from. Whether that exact doctrine, described by the unit for a different sector, is what produced a fixed engagement area 20 kilometers back at Malynivka is not something the battalion has stated outright. It is the most reasonable inference the pattern supports. The same brigade, the same category of drone, ground made lethal on purpose and held rather than struck once. Just extended further from the line than the commander's own description of the buffer zone covers. An assault column moving up this road has to survive crossing it before it can even begin the assault it was built for. The footage itself gets the same discipline this channel applies everywhere else. What exists publicly is combat footage released by the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov through its own channels, showing first-person view strikes on pickup trucks and light vehicles near Malynivka. That is a Ukrainian unit's own self-released record of its own strikes, not an independently itemized vehicle-by-vehicle casualty count from a neutral source. The brigade did not publish an exact number of vehicles destroyed or personnel aboard in this specific release, and this episode will not invent one. What the footage shows, and what it does not independently prove beyond the brigade's own account, are 2 different claims, and only the first belongs in the confirmed column. Corroboration for the standing kill zone, as opposed to this one clip, comes from open-source monitoring rather than from the brigade itself. Exilenova Plus, an open-source monitoring account that tracks and geolocates combat footage from across the war and has become a routine citation in Western defense press, precisely because it verifies location rather than simply republishing raw clips. Publish separate footage from the same coordinates showing accumulated wreckage spread across multiple strikes rather than one engagement's aftermath. Wreckage from more than one strike, in the same place, over more than 1 week, is what separates a documented pattern from a single viral clip. Malynivka is also not the only road this is happening on. War correspondents and open-source analysts covering Donetsk through the summer of 2026 have described a broader shift in how Ukrainian fiber-optic units operate. Rather than chasing individual targets as they appear, crews increasingly hold position over a fixed stretch of road and wait. letting the target drive into a coverage area instead of hunting for one. That is a described pattern across multiple units and multiple sectors, not a claim that every Ukrainian brigade now runs Azov's exact playbook. The sequence this whole reconstruction has been building toward is a short one. A drone operator locks a first-person view feed onto the lead vehicle in the column. A second drone, already airborne, closes on a vehicle further back before the first impact has even finished registering on the operator's screen. The convoy has nowhere to disperse to that the ground sensors and the second wave of operators are not already watching. This is the pattern the doctrine in Part 2 exists to produce, described here as a pattern. Not as a specific time-stamped sequence this episode can independently verify beat by beat. The same standard cuts the other way. Russian forces keep sending convoys into this same stretch of road, and a serious account has to ask why a command structure would do that knowingly. Part of the answer is almost certainly that the July 22 mechanized assault failed to secure an alternate route, leaving this corridor as the shortest supply line available regardless of the cost. Part of it may be that Russian commanders reporting losses up their own chain have less complete visibility into exactly how lethal this particular stretch has become than the open-source record now does. Neither explanation is confirmed by a named source inside Russian command, and this episode labels both as reasonable inference from the pattern, not as established fact. The cost exchange math, even without a precise total dollar figure to attach to it, still reframes the strategic picture. Each drone lost to a jammer, to a mechanical failure, or simply expended on a successful strike costs Ukraine a fraction of what a single replacement pickup truck costs Russia, before counting the personnel and cargo riding inside it. A kill zone that keeps producing that exchange ratio, strike after strike and week after week, stops being a tactical curiosity and turns into a logistics problem for whichever command is still choosing to feed convoys into it. There is a number behind the scale of what a road like this is meant to interrupt. Oryx, the open-source database that logs only visually confirmed equipment losses, photograph or video required for every entry, has documented Russian tank and armored combat vehicle losses running past 14,000 pieces of confirmed equipment since the full-scale invasion began, a floor figure by the database's own admission, since not every loss is filmed. That scale of attrition is why a road like the one at Malynivka is being fed by pickup trucks in the first place, and why a kill zone that can be built for the cost of a spool of fiber-optic cable and a swarm of sub-$1,000 airframes keeps getting paid for by the side driving into it, one convoy at a time. A defender does not need to win every engagement to make a road costly. A defender needs the exchange ratio to stay lopsided often enough, strike after strike, that the arithmetic makes the argument for rooting around it, whether or not any single command has made that call yet. The Malynivka clip matters less as a single viral strike than as a data point in a much larger shift. The depth at which a Russian unit can consider itself safely behind the line is shrinking road by road, as fiber-optic range and persistent drone coverage extend further into what used to be logistics country. 12 miles behind the front used to be a reasonable planning assumption. On this stretch of Donetsk, it has not been true for weeks. That shrinking margin changes what the rear even means for a modern mechanized force fighting this particular war. For most of the 20th century, the distance that counted as safe behind a front line was set by artillery range, then by aircraft range, each expansion measured in tens of kilometers and each one requiring an entire branch of a military to build and field. A fiber-optic spool costs a fraction of what a single artillery shell costs, and every incremental meter of cable added to it pushes that same safety margin inward without requiring a new weapons program, a new aircraft, or a new branch of service. The rate at which that margin has moved over the past 2 years, from a frontline-only threat to a threat that now reaches 12 miles back on at least one documented stretch of road, matters more than any single convoy this episode has described. Two things carry forward from this episode specifically. A kill zone like this is doctrine rather than a weapon system. Buffer zone thinking extended outward and made persistent, and doctrine spreads between units far faster than any single piece of hardware does. And the brigade's own stated claim that the kill zone will extend even deeper is not marketing. It is a stated intention backed by a fiber-optic range that keeps growing with each new spool generation. And there is no obvious technical ceiling yet forcing that intention to stop. None of this is triumphalism, and it should not read that way. Convoys like this one carry crews doing what any army's logistics tail is built to do, moving toward an assault under orders, and the video record of what happens to them is stated here for what it documents, not for spectacle. What it documents is a road that used to be safe and now is not, and a doctrine built specifically to keep pushing that finding outward, one buffer zone at a time, further from any front line either side has agreed exists. The next question this channel will take up is what happens when that same fiber-optic reach starts working the other way, against the drone operators themselves.